Okay, so today I wanted to offer some reflections about breathing, breathwork, and trauma. What is the power of breathwork? And I want to talk a little bit about a conversation I had with a leading author and breathwork expert last week, Anthony Abbagnano, and just talking about his work, his new book, and his experiences of boarding school. On Friday last week, I spoke to a man called Anthony Abbagnano, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right now, but essentially he's an author. He's been teaching breath work for 30 years, maybe. I think originally he trained as an architect and then went into breath work. And he's written a new book. And new book's called Outer Chaos, Inner Calm, just about breathing. And his work, he's taught, I think, up to 1 million people through his website, breath work, and he's got 2,000 practitioners who've learned his breathing, which is basically conscious connected breathing, which the idea is as we go into a space, we're guided, maybe some music, or we can do it on our own. We just breathe for 30 minutes, and it's a conscious breath, and it's a connected, so we don't have a break in between the inhale and the exhale. And interestingly, as I was preparing for the podcast, I like to listen to episodes that people have done, TEDx talks, things like that. I was listening to him talk, and he was sharing where he learnt to do his breathing in his breath work, and he said boarding school. I'm like, I've had that a few times where I have spoken to people who they've been recommended, or I've known them that might be well known in their field, and then as we're talking they go, oh, I went to boarding school. I've had a few conversations like that this week. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit today was about breathing, and how often what happens in trauma is we stop breathing. And I remember when I was in my 20s in the monastery, and I was there, some of you know, for 3 years. And I remember one of the monks saying, "You're not breathing, Piers." And I said, "What?" He says, "You're not breathing." And so I'm just sat there, not breathing. And that's often what happens with trauma, is that we're shocked and we're no longer really inhabiting the body. We've dissociated. And Bessel van der Kolk, in the book The Body Keeps the Score, talks about this quite a lot. And then also Emma Seppälä in her book The Happiness Track. And what I noticed in myself is like, oh yeah, I'm not in my body, I'm not breathing. And often when we have shallow breath, fast shallow breath, then there's been studies by, Emma talks about it in her book, by a man called Piers, and he brought people into a lab, and he got them to feel a certain state. So it might have been calm, might have been stress, anger, and then notice their breathing patterns. So for most of us know, for anxiety, it's going to be short, shallow breath. Calm, long, deep inhales and exhales. Anger, again, short, shallow breathing. It was the second part of the experiment. Piers then got a separate group of people in, and then he got them to model the breathing, so the short, shallow breathing, and then he asked them how they felt. What was fascinating is the people who did the short, shallow breathing, they became anxious, became angry, and those who were modeling the short, shallow breathing, the long, deep breathing, started to feel calm. And as Emma Seppälä talks about in her book here. She says, so what is the fastest way to achieve well-being? It is so close to you that it can easily be overlooked. Your breath, a rapid and reliable pathway into your nervous system dedicated to helping you regain your optimal state. Bessel van der Kolk in The Body Keeps the Score. He says something quite similar. It says here, we can access the ANS, which is the autonomic nervous system, which is the fight-flight, which is, again, trauma. When we go into trauma, often we go into fight-flight. We go into, how can I run away, or how can I fight back? It's not the peaceful place. And yes, it's important for us to go into that sometime, but often what happens with trauma is it's always on. We're always in that ANS. And he says in here, we can access the ANS through breath, movement, or touch. Breathing is one of the few body functions under both conscious and autonomic control. So what that means is the autonomic, we breathe naturally. Unconsciously it just happens, but we can also slow our breathing down. Whereas heart rate, it's more difficult to slow our heart rate down, or our pulse, although it is possible, but it's one of the few processes. So this is really key. And this is what Anthony was sharing in the podcast, this idea of slowing the breathing down. And he talked about this idea of the coherent breath, and that's 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And he says practice that 3 times a day, morning, lunchtime, evening. Do it for 5 minutes. And he says what you'll start to see is that in between those times, if you do this for 2-3 weeks, you will start to automatically breathe deeply. You'll breathe that kind of coherence breath, that in for 5, out for 5. So just some ideas around trauma is often when we're in that space, we might be triggered by something. It's very difficult to talk our way out of stress. Again, Emma Seppälä talks about this in her book. Difficult to talk our way out of stress, but we can breathe our way. And I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, I was with my wife and Christmas shopping, and I went to the local vegetable, the organic place, bought some veggies, and then I went down the street. And I'm like, oh, where's my wallet? So I came back and tried to find it. And it was like, I couldn't see it anywhere. I went into the shop, wasn't there. And I was like, oh, Christmas, my wallet. So I just started to breathe. In for 5, out for 5. I was just breathing. And eventually I calmed down. So I'd gone into that ANS. And then I calmed down. And then I just took my phone number into the organic place, gave it to them. And sure enough, probably half an hour later, someone called up the shop. They called me and I got my wallet back. Money was still in it. So it's just kind of fascinating that sometimes when we go into these, fight flight, we can breathe our way out. So yeah. The invitation is, to just notice that, when am I going into my old responses? It might be people talk about being triggered. If you know you're being triggered in certain instances, use the breath. Slow the breathing down. In for 5. Out for 5. The key is, the understanding, the teachings I've had is always breathe in and out through your nose. Why? It filters air. And also this is where it regulates your nervous system. So the breathing, meaning there's nerve endings there which regulate your breathing. Whereas when we breathe through the mouth, one, we're bypassing the filtering, the warming of the air, and we're also bypassing those nerve endings. So it's not natural. Whereas through the nose is more natural. So yeah, just some ideas. I'm sure I could talk about breathing for hours, to be honest. I've always found it very interesting. First really came across it probably about 28 years ago. Just started to play with it, and I've used it ever since, really, in the monastery, and also with clients. I use it every day with clients. So yeah, love to hear what you think, any ideas, whether you found breath, whether there's a certain technique you found useful. And I'll put a link in the description for the podcast with Anthony Abbagnano, and when that goes live for Friday. And then this Friday I'm interviewing another ex-boarder who is a former CEO and is now a coach, talking about emotionally intelligent leadership and some of her experiences of school. So yeah, exciting week. So have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening, and take care.